Atlanta International Airport was buzzing that morning. Families rushed with luggage. Groggy tourists from red-eye flights shuffled along. Business people with earbuds were locked in their own worlds. Everything seemed normal until the K9 dog barked. It wasn't a routine bark. It was deep, forceful, echoing through Terminal 4 like a fire alarm. A bark that froze the entire area for a moment. Before we begin the story, we kindly invite you to take a moment to like the video, share to spread the love, and subscribe to Heroes for Animals. This way, you won't miss the next heartwarming stories. Thank you for being with us. Ranger, a Belgian Malinois, pulled sharply on the leash. His handler, Officer Daniel Carter, stopped in his tracks. Ranger rarely got it wrong. He was one of the most seasoned dogs on the force, with over 30 successful operations. Carter trusted his instincts more than any scanner or document. "What is it, boy?" Carter murmured, following the dog's intense gaze. There he was, a man in a sharp suit, clean-cut, with discreet glasses, a leather briefcase, and a perfect smile. Beside him, a small boy, maybe 5, with light brown hair and wide eyes. He wore a cartoon T-shirt and clutched a teddy bear, like it was the only thing keeping him afloat. Ranger wouldn't stop barking. "Excuse me, sir." Carter approached. "Would you mind stopping for a moment?" "Is there a problem, officer?" The man replied in flawless English with a slight European accent. "I'm Thomas Whitman, a U.S. citizen. I'm transiting through to Brussels with my adopted son. Everything's in order." He presented the passports before being asked. Everything looked right. Visas aligned, custody papers from a Texas court. The child was registered as Ethan Whitman, but the boy's behavior told a different story. He didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't respond. When a female officer crouched to gently ask him a question, he didn't even lift his gaze. "He's shy," the man cut in calmly. "He's been through trauma. I'd prefer if we didn't push him." Carter felt something twist in his gut. The documents checked out, but Ranger didn't just sniff bombs or drugs. He sniffed fear, tension, lies. This boy reeked of all three. "For protocol, I'm going to need you to come with us for a private check," Carter said evenly. The man agreed without resistance. He walked down a side hallway with the boy toward a secondary inspection room. But as they passed a mirrored wall, Carter saw something that chilled him. The man never looked at the boy, not once. Not like a father, not like someone protecting a child, more like someone escorting luggage. Back in the control room, data Carter requested was being processed. Biometric verification, European database check, red alert if anything didn't match. Ranger planted himself outside the room, unmoving. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and then a high-pitched beep sliced through the silence. Invalid child passport. Real name, Eli Morrow, nationality French, reported missing 73 days ago. Carter closed his eyes for a beat. Ranger had never been wrong, and this time he wasn't either. Officer Daniel Carter closed the file with a slight tremble in his hands. Across from him, seated calmly in the interview room, Thomas Whitman maintained perfect composure. He didn't protest. He didn't ask questions. He merely glanced at his wristwatch, as if this were all a misunderstanding soon to be cleared up. Beside him, the boy remained silent. More than 20 minutes had passed since they entered the room. No one had managed to get a word out of the child. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for help. But something in his eyes made everyone's chest tighten. It wasn't shyness. It was pure, silent fear. "We'll go over one more time, Mr. Whitman," Carter said, reopening the dossier. "This child was reported missing by his mother in France. You are not listed on any recognized adoption records with Interpol or the EU. My lawyer will handle that." The man replied without blinking. "I have a provisional custody order issued in Texas. Everything is legal. We're just traveling through Europe for medical treatment." But the story didn't match the travel records, and the boy hadn't looked at him. Not once. A social worker named Emily Hayes was called into the room. She knelt beside the child, offering him a bottle of water, then a piece of paper and some crayons. The boy took the crayons slowly and began to draw. First a dog, then a plane, then a figure with large eyes and straight eyebrows. Emily frowned. "Is that you?" she asked gently. The boy nodded barely. And this man? Silence. Is he your daddy? The boy gripped the crayon tightly, then let it fall. And with a voice so soft it was barely audible, he whispered, No. That no hit the room like thunder. Carter met Emily's eyes. She stood slowly. Ranger, still watching from the doorway, walked over to the boy. He didn't bark, didn't make a sound. He simply sat beside him and rested his snout on the child's leg. The boy looked at the dog and smiled for the first time. Your name's Eli, isn't it? Emily asked softly. He nodded. Can you tell me where your mommy is? The boy stared at the floor. Another whisper. In Marseille's. She told me if I ever got lost to say I was looking for her. And in that moment, everything became clear. The documents were fake. The custody arrangement non-existent. The trip was a cover. The adoptive father had manipulated everything to take Eli out of the country. His motive was still unknown, but the pain was obvious. Eli wasn't his son. He was a kidnapped child. And no one would have known if Ranger hadn't barked. Hours later, Thomas Whitman's flight was officially canceled. He was taken into custody, this time in handcuffs. His face remained stone cold, but his lips were pressed tightly, and a vein throbbed in his temple. In a separate room, Eli slept curled in Emily's arms with Ranger lying protectively at his feet. A team of child psychologists had been called. Interpol issued a red alert to locate Eli's biological mother. Carter stepped out into the hallway and exhaled slowly. He glanced down at his K-9 partner, who finally seemed at ease. You saw it before any of us, didn't you, buddy? He whispered, scratching behind Ranger's ears. If only everyone listened when you bark. Ranger wagged his tail just once, and in that single gesture was more truth than any passport could ever hold. The office of the FBI's child abduction unit smelled of old paper and lukewarm coffee. On the desk, the case file for Thomas Whitman was growing thicker with every new report. The Interpol red alert had triggered alarms across multiple countries. What once seemed like an isolated incident was beginning to unfold into something much darker. Officer Daniel Carter read aloud under his breath while waiting for the next judicial step. Thomas Robert Whitman, business consultant, private security advisor. No criminal record, but suspicious financial transfers between accounts in Luxembourg, Texas, and Dubai. He closed the file, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. Beside him, Ranger lay on the floor, ears perked. It wasn't over. Not yet. Elsewhere in the facility, Eli sat drinking warm milk while drawing pictures. Emily, the social worker, stayed by his side, and finally, the boy began to speak. He told me my mommy had died. Eli said softly. He said I had to go with him, that if I cried, the bad guys would come. Did you believe him? Emily asked gently. Eli paused. Then he set the crayon down and drew a new image. A drone. Then he looked up and said, No, because Mommy would never let me leave without my teddy bear. That bear, with drooping ears and patched up seams, was the only thing Eli had brought with him from Marseille's. He clung to it like a shield. Emily swallowed hard. Children, she thought, know far more than we give them credit for, and they stay silent about far more than they should. Meanwhile, French authorities had located Claire Morrow, Eli's biological mother. She had reported his disappearance 73 days earlier to no avail. No one had listened. She had no legal counsel, no resources, only a mother's desperate cry that went unheard. But this time was different. From Atlanta, the International Crimes Unit arranged for her immediate transport. An emergency reunification procedure was activated. Carter received the call at 3 p.m. The mother is alive. She's being flown in on a special charter tonight. He closed his eyes for the first time since the ordeal began. Something inside him loosened. Ranger, as if sensing the shift, gently rested his snout on Carter's knee. When Thomas Whitman was summoned for another interrogation, his earlier arrogance had vanished. He looked pale, restless, sweating. What were you planning to do with the child? The prosecutor asked. Silence. Why the false documents? Why the deception? Whitman finally muttered. Because she didn't know what she was doing. Eli needed a real life, a proper education, a future, not emotional chaos. And you thought kidnapping was the answer? Whitman clenched his jaw. He no longer looked like a polished executive. He looked like what he truly was, a manipulator with resources, willing to do anything to retain control. But this time, control was no longer his. That night, Claire arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The moment she saw her son across the room, she screamed his name, Eli. The boy lifted his head and ran. The hug that followed was so powerful, it brought tears to the eyes of more than one officer in the room. Ranger stood a few feet away, motionless. He tilted his head slightly, as if recognizing that nameless feeling only dogs can truly sense. "Thank you for not giving up," Claire whispered to Emily through tears. "Thank you for believing in me and in him." "We just followed the one who really saw the truth," Emily replied, nodding toward Ranger. The case wasn't closed yet, but that night, for the first time in over 2 months, a mother and her child slept under the same roof. And it had all begun because one dog refused to stay silent. Dawn arrived gently at the Family Protection Center, just outside Atlanta. Sunlight streamed to the tall windows, bathing the small room where Eli finally slept soundly wrapped in his mother's arms. Claire Morrow hadn't slept a wink, not out of fear, but because she couldn't stop looking at him. Her son, alive, safe, pulled back from a nightmare the world had refused to see, except for a dog. From the hallway, Officer Daniel Carter watched in silence, cradling a cup of cold coffee. Ranger rested quietly at his feet. So much had happened in so few hours. Too much. "Do you want to go in?" a nurse whispered. Carter shook his head. "Not now. Let them have this moment. Just the two of them." Ranger lifted his head and swiveled one ear, then slowly laid it back down, calm, peaceful, as if he knew the first part of the mission was complete. Later that morning, at the U.S. Attorney's Office, a high-level investigation was officially opened. Multiple officials in Texas were now under scrutiny for enabling the creation of false legal documents on behalf of Thomas Whitman. The signature seals and custody certificates were part of a well-oiled machine of corruption, and this wasn't the first time. At least 3 other children, according to early findings, had been adopted in similar ways. Some were still missing. Others were found trapped in legal gray zones. The case was spreading beyond borders. But for now, that was for the courts to handle. Back at the family center, Eli only wanted one thing: to play again in the sunny backyard. The little boy tossed a red ball across the grass. Ranger chased after it, leash-free, command-free, just driven by instinct. Emily, the social worker, watched from the porch beside Claire. "I've never seen him like this," Claire said, smiling for the first time in weeks. "He used to be so quiet. No laughter. He'd sleep with his eyes half open. And now, just look at him." "He's not doing it for us," Emily replied. "He's doing it for Ranger. That dog was the first to earn his trust." Claire looked toward the dog. Ranger sat with the ball in his mouth, tail wagging as if he knew he was being praised. "What happens to him now?" she asked. "He's nearing retirement. Years of service. Some officers are already working to get him adopted. What if we adopt him?" Claire asked. Emily turned surprised. "You want to?" "I don't just want to. I need to. Eli doesn't feel safe without him. Neither do I. That dog didn't just save us physically. He gave us something back we thought we'd lost, our ability to trust." Emily nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do." That same day, at a quiet but firm press conference, the district attorney's spokesperson confirmed the official arrest of Thomas Whitman and the beginning of legal proceedings for international kidnapping, document fraud, and institutional manipulation. The press had barely scratched the surface of the scandal. But for Carter, the real headline wasn't on the front page. It was outside in that small yard where Eli laughed for the first time in 73 days. It was in Claire, who could finally hold her son without fear of losing him again. And it was in Ranger, lying in the grass, eyes closed and breathing easy. That night, Carter stayed behind a little longer, just him and Ranger. He placed his hand gently on the dog's back and whispered, "Sometimes protocol isn't enough, is it, old friend? Sometimes it takes a heart and a nose that refuses to be fooled." Ranger didn't reply. He just wagged his tail because he knew there were still shadows left to uncover. But for now, at least, there was a mother and son sleeping peacefully, and a dog who, by disobeying, had done the right thing. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta was packed yet completely silent. Cameras were banned, but court microphones recorded every word. At the back, under stark white lights, sat Thomas Whitman, his brow furrowed, handcuffed wrists glinting as a man who once thought himself above the law. At the front stood Claire Morrow, composed, hair neatly tied back, her eyes locked onto the face of the man who had stolen her child. And in the witness seat, little Eli held his teddy bear tightly in one hand while the other rested on Ranger's head. The dog lay at his feet like a silent sentinel. "Do you recognize these documents, Mr. Whitman?" the federal prosecutor asked, holding up a thick folder. "I have nothing to declare," Whitman replied for the third time, but it no longer mattered. The forged documents, the shady wire transfers, the links to corrupt officials. Everything was laid out. The evidence was overwhelming. What remained was to hear the truth from those who were too often silenced. Claire drew in a deep breath as the judge gave her the floor. "For months," she began, her voice steady but strained, "they told me I was overreacting, that I was being emotional, that I had no proof, that he was a respectable man, and I was just a foreign single mother." She looked at Eli, then back to the judge. "My son lived in fear, couldn't sleep, couldn't speak, and no one listened. Not the system, not the police, no one found him." She turned toward Ranger. "Accept this dog." The courtroom didn't stir. No coughs, no whispers, just the weight of truth filling the air. He barked when no one else did. He smelled what others refused to see. The prosecutor stood again. "Your Honor, this case is not just about one abduction. It reveals a system that often protects the powerful and ignores the voiceless. Today, we have the chance to begin correcting that." The verdict arrived 3 hours later. Swift, clear, unappealable. Thomas Whitman was found guilty of international kidnapping, falsifying legal documents, and institutional manipulation. He was denied bail and ordered into immediate custody. Full legal custody of Eli was granted back to Claire with protective measures in place to prevent any future threats. There were no cheers, just silence, one of those rare, deep silences that doesn't weigh you down but lifts something off your chest. Eli looked at his mom and smiled. Ranger, as if sensing the history of the moment, rose to his feet, walked to Claire's side, and rested his head gently on her leg. Outside the courthouse, journalists swarmed for comment, but Claire and Eli said nothing. Instead, they posed for a single unplanned photo, mother, child, and dog, a simple image, honest, unshakable. The next morning's headline said it all: "The dog who disobeyed and saved a child from disappearing forever." 1 month later, Ranger was officially retired from service. In a small but emotional ceremony at the Department of Justice in Atlanta, he was awarded a Medal of Valor for his extraordinary instinct and service. But the most meaningful part wasn't the medal. It was the paperwork signed right after, the legal adoption documents. Ranger was now officially part of the Morrow family. In their new home just outside the city, he slept beneath Eli's bedroom window. Sometimes, Eli still woke in the night, shaken by fading nightmares. But when he heard the steady breathing of his dog beside the bed, he drifted back to sleep. Claire, meanwhile, had started therapy, not just to recover from fear, but to rebuild her life. She no longer spoke in a hushed voice, no longer avoided eye contact. She had regained more than just her child. She had reclaimed her dignity. One afternoon, Carter came to visit. He found Ranger playing with Eli in the backyard, the boys squealing with laughter. Claire was on the porch, pouring lemonade. "I didn't think I'd ever see this much light again," he said with a quiet smile. "Neither did I," Claire replied. "But here we are, a second chance for all of us." Ranger, tongue out and tail wagging, trotted up to Carter. The officer knelt and hugged him tightly. "Good boy," he whispered. "You did it again." And Ranger, as always, said nothing. He just understood everything. It was a Sunday morning. Sunlight spilled through linen curtains. In the kitchen, Claire was making toast while Eli, still in pajamas, chased Ranger around the living room with a superhero cape flapping behind him. "Captain Eli and his flying dog," he shouted, giggling uncontrollably. Ranger, patient as ever, trotted leisurely, clearly enjoying the chase. He no longer wore a police harness, no longer followed commands, but he still fulfilled his mission with more heart than ever, protecting the family that had given him back his soul. Out on the porch, a new flower pot held a hand-painted sign that read, "A four-legged hero lives here." That day wasn't just any Sunday. Claire had been invited to speak at an international child protection forum. It was the first time she would publicly tell her story. Eli stayed with a neighbor while she flew to D.C. The auditorium was full. Judges, prosecutors, police officers, volunteers, therapists. Everyone fell silent as Claire stepped onto the podium. She took a breath and began. "I was alone, silenced, on the edge of giving up until a dog barked. That bark didn't just save my son. It saved me because when no one believed me, he did." The room didn't move. "I'm not here just to say thank you," she continued. "I'm here to remind you that listening can save lives. A teacher, a caseworker, a neighbor, a dog. Any of us can be the thread that keeps someone from falling apart." She ended with a phrase that settled deep in every heart present. Surviving was an act of courage, but rebuilding, that was an act of love. Weeks later, Claire received a letter in the mail from Texas. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in shaky lettering. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. You helped expose something much bigger. Your courage saved lives. Thank you." A judge who learned too late. Claire didn't need apologies. But that letter was a quiet confirmation. It had all been worth it. Back home, Eli no longer had nightmares. He slept peacefully with Ranger curled at the foot of the bed. He'd started drawing again without fear. In every sketch, two figures appeared, a boy and a dog with a cape. "I want to be like Ranger when I grow up," he told his mom one night. "Brave?" she asked with a smile. "No, someone who listens when no one else does." Claire bent down, hugged him tight, and whispered, "Then you're already just like him." One crisp fall afternoon, Officer Carter visited them again. He brought a small photo album. They sat on the porch like old friends, flipping through the images, snapshots of the journey that had changed all their lives. "Sometimes, I think it was all a miracle," Carter said, looking at a photo of Eli hugging Ranger. Claire shook her head gently. "It wasn't a miracle. It was a dog who refused to follow an order, a man who dared to look beyond protocol, and a child who never stopped hoping someone would come find him." Carter lowered his gaze. Ranger approached quietly, rested his snout on the officer's knee, and closed his eyes. No one said anything. They didn't have to. That night, Claire wrote in her journal. The words came effortlessly. "True heroism doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it walks quietly beside us, smells our fear, and lays down next to us when the world falls apart. Sometimes it has four legs and a heart bigger than our own." She closed a notebook, kissed her sleeping son, and she knew at last. Fear no longer lived in that house. And the dog who broke the silence had rebuilt everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals, where we celebrate compassion, loyalty, and the heroes who walk on four legs.